Delighted to be joined by Eoin Morgan, England's World Cup winning captain, who looks bathed in sunshine there, wherever you are. Hello, Eoin.
Hello, Athers. Yeah, there's a bit of, it's a break in the clouds is the best way to describe it at the moment. It's been a bit overcast the last few days, but I'm at home, I suppose like everybody else. And looking forward to this. There's not a lot of opportunity that you normally get to speak in reference either to Middlesex or England, particularly to the members. So thanks to you for doing this. We should have done a Q&A both ways. We should have elaborated on your episode of Donald in the Dark. I could have brought back some.
People are more interested in you than me, certainly Middlesex members anyway. But let's start with lockdown, because you've become a father for the first time. So congratulations on that. And how's it been going?
Thanks. Yeah, baby Leo was born 3 months ago now. So right at the beginning of the lockdown period, and both my wife and I have absolutely loved it. There's been a huge silver lining to the terrible pandemic that's going on outside, for a couple of reasons. I suppose one, I got to be at home for the first period, to do little other than support, and clean and cook, and I suppose that's all he can do at this period. But the other is to see him, change every day. He's gone from being this size to that size in the space of 3 months, which is extremely cool and unbelievably different feeling to anything I've ever experienced. So we've loved it.
Has the apple fallen far from the tree? Is he a Morgan baby? Is he got a kind of poker face right from the start?
Yeah, he's just quite blank with massive cheeks and a bit of ginger hair. So
so a period away from cricket. You're quite a closed book in many ways. You don't give that much of yourself away. And it's never been immediately obvious to me, watching you on the field, how much of a love of the game that you do have, in that you do have a bit of a poker face out on the field. In the time that we've been in lockdown and that you've been not able to play the game, is it something that you've badly missed? Is cricket an absolute love of yours, or do you just see it as a vehicle for your career? And how much have you missed it?
Yeah, I think I've gone through both stages and primarily ended up focusing on the one that's as productive to performance to me as possible. Like any other kid growing up that's involved in cricket, or cricket is a number one sport, you want to fulfill your potential and live your dream, because that's the sport you love. And I still love cricket to this day, but being overwhelmed or focusing on it too much really does have an impact on the energy that I can apply myself, either at practice or during the game. So I suppose over the years I've found out that the hard way, through by taking time off at different stages when I've needed it, when I've been overwhelmed by different circumstances, and I suppose a little bit of playing a lot of international cricket during a period where I didn't play a lot of games, particularly on test tours. I suppose you go through the highs and the lows with the team, and obviously build up the anticipation of trying to present your best case to be selected, and then being let down in whatever manner. But the dramatic effect that has a huge mental draining energy on you. So I think over the years I've I suppose fine-tuned what works for me and what doesn't, and thankfully that's led to enjoying finer things in life, other sports, making great friends, spending time with people. So during the lockdown period, that's exactly what I've done. I think there's been a huge move towards people being active physically a lot more, whereas I've actually focused a little bit on my physical fitness, but my mental improvement and quality of life is far more important than the physical nature in which I'll need to be in by the time I finish.
You've been enjoying lockdown too much.
Well, people ask you, have you been looking after yourself? And you sort of say, well, a bit too much. I've been eating loads and drinking loads, and I've done enough to keep myself in physical shape. So I have thoroughly enjoyed it. but it is, there's this conscious effort of people trying to look good and give the perception that they're working out the whole time. And it's like, well, if you've had a high intense lockdown, you're going to come out of it absolutely drained, and it's going to be pointless. So we've sort of spoken about this to a few players, probably candidates who are lend themselves to, addictive personalities more so than others. But it's been good fun. I suppose the last couple of weeks, so Gus Fraser, our director of cricket, great man, called about 2 weeks, and then sort of in anticipation of the first ODI potentially against Ireland at the end of July. We need to get back hitting balls, and the preparation around that obviously involves groundsmen, COVID officers, and coaches being on furlough and things. And the call caught me off guard, because I sort of said, well, we've 2 months until that game. I don't even know where my cricket kit is, never mind practice. So I have good news. I did locate a bat on Monday and then started just doing some shadow batting, because I tend to get a bit of tennis elbow when I come back, just to groove into it. But I've not hit a ball yet, but I'm getting to a stage where I do want to.
And therefore, will it have re-energized you in a way? I mean, clearly you had a decision to make after the World Cup. It wasn't entirely sure whether you were going to carry on as captain of the one-day side. You obviously eventually decided to do so. Do you think that this period away from the game will allow you perhaps a significant post-World Cup career now as England's one-day captain?
Yeah, I hope so. And the more I think about it, when I suppose the primary question is do you feel up for it? Do you feel driven? And what does that plan look like moving forward? Is it clear? And when you're working towards potentially the World Cup, which was around the corner and now potentially isn't, and the next World Cup moves further along, having this time away from the game does definitely re-energize you mentally. But in actual fact, the fact is that if we don't perform, I won't be in the job past a year. So we're in a high performance based industry that you need to be performing extremely well, because the level of expectation has now shifted. And I think that's rightly so.
As we come out of the pandemic, obviously the fixture list is going to be incredibly crammed, isn't it? They're going to be trying to fit in all these fixtures that have been postponed. Who knows what it will look like over the next year or two. Do you think it will accelerate some of the trends that we've seen? I mean, we've seen the game almost go in a diverged way between red ball and white ball. It's becoming very difficult now for players to be across formats. You've got one or two in the England setup like Stokes, Butler, Root, the real top notchers who can do it across formats. But that's not straightforward for everybody. Do you think post-pandemic those trends will accelerate and it will see more of a divergence between one day and Test cricket?
Yeah, I think that's difficult to say. I think in the immediate future, just judging on conversations both with Ashley Giles, Ed Smith, and Joe Root himself, the level of expectation for guys to go in lockdown and to play a full summer's worth of cricket in the space of 2.5 months or 3 months is unrealistic. I think the detrimental effect it can have on their career down the line does not outweigh them playing sort of all of the games in one. So I think there's going to be a lot of flexibility moving forward, and a huge duty of care for the ECB and the PCA to look after its players during the next probably year or so. But there's definitely help there. Definitely is help there. And I think when there is that strong relationship between the player and the ECB, it has a huge effect both on performance when it's needed. High performance games, you're talking about Ashes, World Cups. When you look after players do repay you, because when you look after them, you talk about intangible things, things that they feel inside, confidence, value, all different things like that. So I suppose when you look at different teams that have produced unbelievably extraordinary performances over a long period of time, they talk about feeling, confidence, and different things like that. So it's nice to see that Ed and Ash, Joe and Silvers as well, with the coach, are putting that at the front of their mind as opposed to being performance based for this strange period, probably for the next year or so.
Let's go back if we can, because we're all shaped by our upbringing and environment. And in one sense, yours sounds like a very cliched Irish upbringing: large Catholic family, small terraced house, outskirts of Dublin. The cliche is broken, of course, by the love of cricket, which is an unusual one in Ireland. Where did that love of the game come from in your family?
Yeah, essentially it came from my dad. My dad was completely fanatical about the game and still is. And his love for the game rubbed off on all of us kids. We all played cricket. 3 brothers and 2 sisters. All the boys played some sort of representative cricket for Leinster or Ireland underage, and the 2 girls played cricket for Ireland. So his love for the game and his passion for the game certainly rubbed off on us over the years. But even you go back, his father was the exact same. He was the son of a blacksmith to a local lord in the same area that we grew up, and used to play staff against household type of games, and that's how they started playing cricket. And then my dad's dad, who died a young man, had 6 kids, and all the men played, because it was a different time in everybody's life. All the men played, and then that sort of followed on.
Was it a highly competitive family? I mean, your brothers were older. There's often stats and research to suggest that the younger brothers are often the high achievers in a family, because they're having to be put up against the older brothers, and in a very competitive environment, you have to stretch yourself to survive. Is that how it was in your family?
Yeah, absolutely. I spent the majority of my childhood bowling, which is not a great ask for a short, fat, young, ginger-haired guy. But I totally agree with that. I played all of my underage cricket, no matter how strong it was. I played at both my brothers' age groups. There was a year and a half between them, and then the age difference between me and the next brother is 6 years. So effectively, I played with them. I played men's cricket at a very young age. I started playing men's cricket when I was 11, and then 12 and 13, I played in the second team with them, and then they moved into the first team, and it took me a couple of years to get into that. So I totally agree. The competitive nature, and I think that stemmed from my dad. My dad would always try and sort of fire a competitive edge up, as opposed to just batting and bowling all day, which was good fun.
Was it a very political household? I mean, I think you've spoken in the past about occasionally going over the border, playing in Northern Ireland, particularly at the times of the marches, and that there must have been some impact there, even on a young man, a cricket-loving young man. Was it a political household?
The household wasn't political at all. I suppose in many ways, it was as diverse as it could have been. It was a Catholic Irish family who, my mum was born and raised in England, and my dad was born quite locally, but obviously of the same religion. The sort of points that you make reference to are the interprovincial underage tournaments that we used to play, and predominantly we played them in Northern Ireland, either in Derry or Belfast, and there was definitely a I suppose raise of awareness from, I was probably about 11 or 12 when I first experienced it, and it's incredibly eye-opening and shocking for a young kid to see, and particularly then at night, you're a young kid playing corridor and with everybody up and down the rooms, and then you sort of see there's riots going on, or there's on the side of a hill there's burning tires with different letters on it depending on who it was. So it's to start with, it wasn't a huge education. It was more open, trying to find an understanding and where everything fitted. But I think that provoked that side of me that's intrigued by different things, and opened my eyes to a lot of things.
You eventually came over to England. You left the family at quite a young age. You spent a fair chunk of time over at Dulwich. Do you think, having left your family at quite a young age, that kind of gave you an independence of spirit? I mean, in your time as a cricketer and your time as captain, what's very noticeable to me is that you speak your mind. You're not somebody to be cowed into saying what people think you should say. Do you think that independence of spirit came from having left your family at a reasonably early age and having to strike out on your own?
Yeah, I would. I suppose starting, so I went to Dulwich for a very short term when I was 14, and I can remember it was the first time I'd ever been on a plane. So coming to London and sitting in traffic jams and going and playing games and on this big beautiful school that had an unbelievable array of facilities was such an incredible experience. But I can remember on the way back, I missed the flight. We were sat in a traffic jam and missed the flight. And I remember being on the phone right beside the check-in gate, ringing my mum, and I was 14 years old. To me at the time, I was thinking, oh, this isn't a big, there's another flight. I can see it on the television here. It says there's another flight. Surely they can put me on it. So sort of from then moving forward, I travelled a lot, both back to London when I signed at Middlesex as a 16-year-old, but in the lead into me signing, I went on exchange to a school in Durban for 4 months in 2003, which was just epic, because it was during the 2003 World Cup. I stayed with a family who absolutely loved sport, and we didn't necessarily have to attend a lot of lessons, so we killed time in the library for as long as we could, and then until the coach was available to either throw us balls or feed the bowling machine, me and another guy called Ronan Flannery would just sort of potter around. So for 3 or 4 months, that was unbelievable. Again, it sort of raises that awareness of being independent and not relying on other people.
Who were the heroes and the people you looked up to then? You're a young Irish kid, and Irish cricket has not really started to rise and compete in the way that it did when you started to play for them. Who were the heroes that you looked up to in those younger days?
Yeah, well, the obvious one to look up to was Ed Joyce. At the time, he paved the way for anybody who really wanted to give cricket a good crack. At the time I started playing for Ireland, he was a well-established player at Middlesex, and when you're obsessed with something, you find yourself looking every time he goes and bats, or if you have an opportunity to see a very small clip, you'll watch it, or you're on teletext the whole time. So Ed was certainly somebody that I looked at for inspiration. And then when I came to Middlesex, I felt like I was one of the luckiest people in the world. I was able to chat to my hero. Although Ed is a man of very few words, it was just to be around him and see how he operated was a huge privilege.
Your Middlesex debut, I think, was 2006 against Notts at Trent Bridge. Can you remember the Middlesex side that you played in the first game?
So Ben Hutton captain. So leave the other opener. I'll say Nick Compton, Scott Styris.
Yeah.
Owe Shah.
Yeah. Number 3.
Did Compton open the batting?
No. Number 4.
No. Okay, number 4. Number 5, Scott Styris. Number 6, maybe myself.
Yeah.
7, Ben Scott.
Yeah.
Chris Peplow, number 8.
9, yeah.
9. 7, 8, 9. Johan Lowe.
Yes, very good.
Who else? Oh, Chris Wright played that game.
Very good. Now, if you don't get the other 2, your career as England's one-day captain is going to be very, very short-lived.
Oh, Ed Smith.
And number 11? It'll be even shorter-lived if you don't get it.
Oh my God, who was it? I can't remember. I've blanked.
Your England coach, Chris Silverwood.
Oh, was it? Oh no. Oh no!
What struck me there?
Yeah, that was an
I looked
epic
at
game.
that
Do you have the
team.
scorecard?
I looked at
Describe
that
it.
team and I thought, who were the really senior players there that might have, if I recall the start of my Lancashire career, I had David Hughes and Jack Simmons and Graham Fowler, Paul Allott, these players, very, very senior players. I look at that side and I don't actually see a lot of very senior or experienced county players there. Who are the guys who put their hand around your shoulder right at the start of your career?
Yeah, I think guys that I would look to particularly at that time, was Owe Shah. He was by far and away the most talented and promising player at the club. He'd already played for England at that stage, so he'd experienced that at a very young age. So when you're trying to achieve what somebody else has, you have a million questions for that person and how to try and bridge that gap or what you need to do. But of course, once you've achieved it, you're very blasé about the process in which you do, which always was. He found things extremely easy. But yeah, I suppose that was it. We had a massive hole in our team. We got relegated that year because Jamie Dalrymple, Ed Joyce, and obviously Straussy were playing for England at the time, and it left a massive hole in our team. Which was, well, that game there was devastating. It was my debut. We got bowled out, I think, for 49, and Notts got about 380, of which David Hussey and Flem put on about 300 probably, and then the rest of the Notts team got 60, and then we got bowled out for 150. So the next few weeks I spent looking at the classified section of the paper to try and figure out what I was going to do with my life.
As I've seen you over the years, your batting has changed quite a lot. I mean, you went through that bizarre period in the UAE where you began to squat down and squatted down so far your arse was almost touching the floor at the crease. How have you looked at the span of your career and the way that your game as a batsman has developed?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the personality that I am. I think certainly for the first half of particularly my international career, when I had something in my head that I thought worked or had worked previously, I would stick to that for as long as I possibly could before I'd even contemplate changing it. Whereas now I'm a little bit better with recognizing things a little bit earlier. And I think that instance where I was squatting down and my bum was nearly touching the ground, I'd played test match cricket the previous year where, averaged well, scored hundreds, and it got to a stage where it was out of hand, but I was still adamant. I think I was coming back from a shoulder injury, or I was out for 3 months, but there was very little cricket. And I had an opportunity to change it. I remember the conversation with Andy Flower, and I was young, quite stubborn, as I still am, but strong-minded in the way that, no, this works. If it works in Test cricket, it'll work everywhere else. So I think after that period, and probably particularly that series in the UAE where I was left out of the following Test squad, and rightly so, that gave me time to go back to working on something that I needed to change.
Middlesex, in the time that you've been there, success has come few and far between, really. You had the great championship win in 2016, I think. There was a T20, NatWest T20 or Blast, whatever it's called, then win. I don't think a lot more silverware has come your way other than that. Why? What's been missing?
Very good question. Ultimately, it's performance. I think when you get down to different stages of important parts of the season, we have fallen short almost every time. And I think it looks worse on paper than it actually is, either around the team or in relation to runs we score and wickets we take. But there are certain moments throughout the season, probably more recently, where we've fallen by the wayside. But I suppose, given the change in coach and change in framework about how we want to play, probably over the next 4 years with Stuart Law at the helm, I think things are looking extremely positive.
Impression is that you've not always pulled your weight as a player. I looked at your stats, actually. They're not much different to your stats as an England player. How do you look back on your performances for your county as opposed to your country?
Yeah, you're always sitting there saying you can always do better. And I don't, if you're not asking enough of the right questions of yourself. Nobody's a perfect player. But I think larger to my contribution on the field is probably around the team. The effect I can have on other players, the experience in the games that I've played, and the high pressure moments that I've been in. I think having somebody around who's been there before and can pass on good information, I suppose, perform like I have done in an England shirt, because I think many Middlesex members or fans will say that I probably perform better, but in actual fact it's not that dissimilar in many ways. It's just we haven't, it would look prettier if we'd have won something along the way.
Do you feel like an outsider sometimes? I mean, when you first came over from Ireland, how easy was it to fit in? And the fact that you've been a regular and consistent England player means that you play far less county cricket than perhaps players of my generation did.
Yeah, I would have fitted in even if it was the most challenging of circumstances. When you want something so bad, you will do anything to try and achieve it. So I believe that if circumstances were different, I would have done everything to try and fit in. But I think John Embry was coach when I was signed, and Jason Pooley was the second team coach who came and watched me initially, and then subsequently recommended me to be signed. He made the transition from, I suppose, being an outsider to a second team player to a first team player very, very fluid and acceptable, because you didn't go unrecognized being an Irish player trying to break into the system. And I suppose the emphasis of focus shifted then when there was an influx of Cole players subsequently after that. But I think I've been made extremely welcome at a club that I've admired for a very long time. And
so you don't regret your choice of county club?
No, absolutely not. I love the club. I do. It's been such a big part of my life, and it's led to so many opportunities for me, living in London, having a family here, putting down roots, and I've been here 17 years now, so it's quite a long time of my short life. So they've played a huge role.
Have you watched The Last Dance in lockdown, Michael Jordan's documentary?
Yes, I have. It was excellent.
I wanted to talk about, England's transformation really as of their white ball side under your leadership. If we just look at different sports and different elements to success and producing a successful team, what did you take away from that documentary in terms of A, Jordan and the leadership that he showed, and B, that team that was clearly unbelievably successful over 8 seasons or so?
Yeah, I think the overriding thing that I took from the documentary was that in order to win and be successful at a consistent level, you need to be more than just one or two players. You need to have a squad. You need somebody managing that. So I sort of, having had a couple of weeks to think about it, I've sat there and I'm now sort of delving into Phil Jackson's, history and books, because there's a huge story there with him and the what was the MD's called? Kraus, that was him. So there's a huge background story there, managing and driving players and moving things forward. And obviously it's been dramatized for the documentary. But when you see how, even right to the end, how Phil Jackson operated and just sort of recognized the end of a journey and the start of the next, he was way ahead of his time. I know he's an extremely spiritual guy and has a different avenue into his, I suppose, role, but it's fascinating. I think he was way ahead of his time. He's 11 rings. He moved from place to place, and obviously having being a player as well. It's very interesting. Obviously, it must be unbelievably satisfying as well.
Do you think cricket as a sport is behind some other sports, I'm thinking of baseball in the States, in terms of the structure and leadership of sporting outfits?
I'm not sure, because I haven't experienced many other industries or fields. I think so. One sport that I've been massively struck by, where leadership is at the forefront of everything that they do, is in rugby. So every time you go in to watch a rugby team, there will be a number of leaders that aren't named or maybe recognised as with a title. But they take on leadership roles because they have to. If they don't, people sort of get hurt in a nasty way, and it's as close to a military-like scenario that you can get. And I'd imagine, in the military, you'd have an unbelievable group of leaders within, platoons and.
Is that something you've tried to do in the one-day side? I mean, I suppose the cricketing analogy there would be you've got a group of batsmen, you've got a group of bowlers. Have you tried to almost set up little silos within the outfit and have leaders of those, or not?
Yeah, I think sort of subconsciously you do. I think when I took over, we had a lot of experienced guys who had been through a lot of tough times and good times as well, but trying to empower guys and make them feel comfortable enough to contribute to big decisions. When decisions actually matter, that's when you want guys to contribute. So yes is the answer to that. We try and empower as many guys as we can. We give them as much leeway as we can within the framework that we use. And on the journey that we've been on, particularly over the last 4 years with the ODI team, naturally, because the guys have been given a bit of leeway, they have grown into fantastic leaders. And when it comes down to crunch moments or high performance moments, you need experienced players doing the most simple things right. I remember I spoke to Eddie Jones a couple of years ago, and again, a lot of his prep around World Cup preparation revolved around the exact same thing. Can you get guys that you trust to make simple decisions at key moments of the game?
Eddie Jones has somebody that he almost leans on. I've forgotten the chap's name actually, but he's a guy there who is not employed by the RFU. He's almost Eddie Jones's personal guru that he kind of leans on, that this chap maybe takes Eddie aside and says, you did that well today, or you did that not so well today. Do you have people either from within the group or outside that kind of pull you aside and say you might?
Yeah, here I try and learn as much as I can from absolutely everybody. And I think in order to do that, you have to be able to tell your story and almost talk about your mistakes and your experiences and how that's shaped you as a leader. But sort of the one constant throughout my role as a leader has been my sister. My sister's really successful in what she does in her own field, and manages a lot of people, and has achieved quite a lot in the world. So I use her as much as I can as a mentor and a sounding board, because I think she's brilliant.
What's the worst thing she's told you?
The worst thing? I actually can't remember. I'm normally good at remembering the bad things as well, but there are so many good things. I remember calling her when I got offered the captaincy, and like any big decision, you sit there and you talk about the pros and the cons. And then there were so many pros at the time. Before we even started, she said, "You have to take this. This is the best opportunity that will ever fall on your lap."
So we're talking about the eve of the 2015 World Cup there.
Yeah.
So I remember clearly at the end of that tournament, it was obviously a disastrous tournament in many ways. I remember clearly seeing you at the end of that tournament on the podium when England had been bundled out. And your eyes were almost dead. And it was almost a struggle for you to talk to whoever's interviewing you, Nass or whoever. And there looked to be no life there inside you. If you compare yourself now as a captain to at that point 4 years ago, how different are you in terms of how you go about things now to that?
I'd say the biggest improvement for me as captain is just being able to compartmentalize things. You know, being able to deal with something and forget about it until that subject crops up again. When I look back at 2015, it was incredibly draining, not in a good way. So going about things, you try and take in as much information, you make your own decision at the end of it, but what people like to call a gut feel. But at the time, the gut feel that I continued to make was always somebody else's. And if I could rewind the clock, there'd be a few decisions, not big decisions that would have had impact on the game or our performance necessarily, because we were extremely poor in that tournament, but things that would have made the mental drain on me less, and that I've become more at ease with, and you know, making decisions as well. I probably have a better process now in which I go about making them and talking about them as well.
Do you find making decisions easy? I mean, it weighs heavily on a lot of people. You know, captaining the England side is a significant responsibility. It's not like perhaps being Prime Minister where the decisions that you're making are life and death decisions, but it's still a significant responsibility in any case. Does that weigh heavily? Do you sleep easily at night if you've got to drop somebody the next day? How do you cope with decision making?
No, I meet it front on. It's your job to make tough decisions. You never get applauded for making the easy ones. So if you want to be a successful captain, you have to be really good at making decisions when they're needed. Obviously, have a winning team as well. That helps. But I don't mind them. I think getting the framework right about how you make those decisions is, well, it's really important for me, or was. That makes things a lot easier. So when something extremely big crops up, you still refer to the process in which you go about it. You don't say, "Oh crap, I've got to make a big decision."
Just the members who are watching, just take them into the room in that hotel in Colombo in 2018 when both the red ball teams and white ball teams were sat there, and yourself and Joe Root kind of announced the results of almost a 12-month review of England's culture. Just perhaps take us into that room, because that was a very significant meeting under both your captaincies. Yeah,
absolutely, and quite a big sort of line in the sand for all England cricketers, current England cricketers, because regardless of results at the time, and we had been doing incredibly well as a white ball team. We were being judged for whatever reason, and the reason mainly was the incident in Bristol where Ben and Alex had been out, and there was an incident late at night which should never have happened. So stemming from that, almost there was a complete lack of identity and cultural values within the England cricket team. So people just assumed that that's how everybody operated who was an England cricketer. And Andrew Strauss, who was the director of cricket at the time, was willing us to try and put something together on paper that would culminate in something that we could take pride of placing. Because after the Bristol incident, Ben had a prolonged period out of the game, and sort of the guys, even guys who are still playing now, were in Australia, where Ben missed in the Ashes and the one-day series. The one-day series was successful, the Ashes series wasn't. But the complete and utter distraction after a good or bad day's play of Ben Stokes being the headline or the sort of modus operandi, regardless of what happened, really did frustrate a lot of people, and actually was a really good example of how things can be derailed. So Straussy empowered us to try and put something together, along with some consequences if guys stepped out of line, and some protocols in what they would look like. So over the course of...
You were a key driver of this, were you? And did you take soundings from externally as well, from perhaps other sports or other leaders, or how did it work?
Yeah, so myself and Joe equally sort of drove it along with the team psychologist David Young, who played a big role in it. And to start with, his role was in exposing us and educating us in other teams outside of cricket that were perceived to be successful for whatever reason, but looking at the strategy and the planning behind the performance, there was actually a culture. So the Manchester City psychologist came and spoke to us and talked about how it was extremely difficult to, bring together 25 high performance players that speak 12 different languages and make them feel passion for the city of Manchester to put on the shirt. Who else did we speak to? We spoke to James Kerr, the guy who wrote Legacy, about the All Blacks, which was probably more applicable for myself and Joe, because we're big rugby fans and know the sort of know and can track the progression of the All Blacks, and just looking behind their 72% win ratio until 2011, and then the 93% win ratio that goes beyond that. So things that people are held accountable for outside of performance is what we wanted to look at. And over the course of those 12 months, in various different chats where everybody had a feeling or opportunity to contribute, there were some huge consistencies with the wording that guys use, and how people could relate to playing for England if you only played one T20 game or you played 100 games. And looking back on it now, I'm glad that we did it, because it led to a past players dinner, one at Lord's, I think it was 2 years ago now, in which every current player attended, and majority of past players who are alive attended as well. And for every current player, making that connection with history, the history of the game, where the cap stemmed, the different experiences everybody had such a big effect on our guys. I remember we toured the West Indies and everybody spoke about it for a long period of time after that. So if that was the only thing that came of it, it was completely worthwhile.
I asked you to take us into the team room for a key meeting in November 18 in Colombo. Take us into the dressing room now, after the defeat against Sri Lanka at Headingley in the World Cup, or indeed take us into the dressing room ahead of the India match at Edgbaston, which became a crunch match. You had to win it, otherwise you're going to be out of the tournament, and the challenges on you as a captain at that point.
Yeah, I think to come to Sri Lanka first, there was guys were extremely frustrated and angry, because we played a brand of cricket that we'd been extremely successful of, a positive, aggressive, smart brand of cricket over the last 4 years that had been extremely successful for us. And during that game, there were a number of times that we had opportunities to play positively, play smartly, show energy in the chase, different opportunities at different times, and we didn't display them at all. So going away from the identity in which everybody knew that we played was the biggest devastation in many ways, and guys felt as if they let everybody down. And I suppose the challenge is for me as a captain then is to try and regroup, focus and protocol. One is to ask the simple question, which everybody knows the answer to, is, are we still committed to playing this positive, aggressive brand of cricket? The scores have been down a little bit in the World Cup as to any of the bilateral series that we've played, and again, overwhelming yes to everybody. I was like, right, well, how do we do that? How do we re-engage with that? What do we need to do? So putting plans in place to free guys up mentally, I think was important. But having had not a lot of time to do that, it actually had quite a big effect on the following game as well, because guys were quite drained, and you play against an extremely strong side in Australia, where they try and almost suffocate you with the disciplined nature in which they were performing, and they did. So there was a bit longer period of time between then and the must-win game at Birmingham. So we sat down, we arrived 2 days out from the game, we trained in the afternoon, so we got there early and sat down and had a completely open meeting with our psychologist, David Young, which the framework was surrounded by our levels of expectation on our own shoulders coming into the World Cup, what that looked like. And the second question is, where is that now? And once we ironed out what it looked like coming in and now what it looks like, it takes everybody sort of to the present. Then you sort of draw a line under it, and not draw a line under it, but you find a way of transferring one thought to the next. So there's a continuous road from one to the next mentally, because that's what you just want to free guys up in order to play the way that's been so successful for us. So we did that. Pretty much everybody spoke in the meeting, and to hear guys speak about the level of expectation they put on each other, I think hearing it from other people actually made them realize, well, why am I doing that? Everybody's under pressure to perform. It happens every game. How would you feel like you're a great player? And sort of everybody saying it. So it's very rarely that team meetings transfer so quickly into performance, but I think that was probably the most productive team meeting that I've ever been a part of.
Well, you're not a big one for team meetings, are you, generally?
I hate them. I'm quite an honest guy. We're dealing with sportsmen here who won't get offended when you say that their attention span is very short. They need to be occupied with something that's important to them the whole time. So trying to engage with them for an hour, sitting down watching slides of Steve Smith hitting on drives or nicking off, which he never did, it's just absolutely ridiculous. And you can still do that. You can cater for guys that want to watch as much footage as you can, but not at detriment to 5 other guys who are going to fall asleep, and then the coach and the captain are going to be disappointed by it. So we found that our most productive way of doing it is just talking on the outfield. Almost go straight to what plan B and what plan C are for bowlers, because plan A never changes. And then with the bat, does anything change? Who's probably the opposition's most dangerous bowler? And then you work back from there. Does that mean that we can attack him? Absolutely not. If the opportunity is there, get after him. So very, very simple way of looking at things, but I think it's suited the guys that we have in our team. Guys want to get on with things. They want to go out and hit balls and bowl balls. They're very driven by doing things, as opposed to the guys that are deep thinkers. We only have a handful of them.
Did you sleep well the night before the World Cup final? How did you sleep that night?
I slept really well, actually. Yeah, it was a bit weird. We actually just found out that Tara was pregnant, which was unbelievably exciting, but it was too early to tell anybody. But I'm very good friends with.
Were all your family over as well?
They were, yeah. So everywhere. I tend not to see a lot of my family the day before the game. I'll speak to them on the phone, but my dad is an absolute bag of nerves before any game. So that nervous energy just explodes at different stages. So you don't want to be around that. But the best example of that is my Test debut was at Lords against Bangladesh in 2010, and he flew across. And I used to live up in Finchley, right beside the indoor school, small apartment. He was in the spare room, and at 6 o'clock in the morning, I could hear all the way along the corridor. And I looked out, and he was fully dressed in his suit and tie, 6 o'clock in the morning, shoes on, pacing up and down this small path. And I was like, what is going on? So he was quickly sent outside, and hopefully, I actually didn't get back to sleep. He woke my mum up as well. But to cut a long story short, he left after day 3. After day 3, I was supposed to meet up with him for a meal. I called him, and he said, no, we're flying out. We're on our way to the airport. We've seen enough. We can catch the rest of it on the telly.
And when you look back at that fantastic day, what are the memories must occasionally just come to you, even now, a few months on. What are the key flashbacks that you have? Oh, there are a few. I think every time it rains now, I sort of get sweaty palms, and it takes me back to 15 minutes before the toss when it starts raining and the covers come. Wasn't it? I mean, come on, the timing of it couldn't have been worse. It still wouldn't have changed what we would have done, but cricket is so funny. The toss has such a psychological impact on both teams, both sets of players, that you have sort of half of your team that want to know what you want to do and why are you going to do that, and the reasons behind it. The other guys just don't care. But if it turns out to be the wrong decision, which it majority of the time it never is, people just don't play well. That's the honest answer. It creeps into the guys who never really care about the toss, but all of a sudden the toss is a big issue. So yeah, I suppose that's one of the biggest ones. And then throughout the day, it's just because it was so intense. There are so many moments in the game that we think, all right, we're sort of a little bit ahead here, but we're not too far ahead, and now we're a little bit behind. The biggest moment that stands out for me before the Super Over started was Jimmy Neesham bowling. I think it was about the 47, 48 over, probably 49th over, probably. And Ben hits a slower ball down to long on right in front of the pavilion, and Trent Bolt catches it and stands on the rope while the ball was in the air. And you can see the trajectory, particularly hitting sort of up the hill at Lords. You can see when it's going to be a catch. Even though if you can't see the player, you can see. And the whole time the ball was in the air, I just thought, if he catches this, the game's dead and buried. The game is over. We're not getting the runs. And that's the only time during the day that I thought I went through that process where I'd already gone, right, that's it. That's the game right there. The rest of it, you were always in a position to either bring it back or try and get further ahead. And in that Super Over, then, let's just finish off with the Super Over. A, Jofra Archer, and B, I suppose, the lessons that you'd learned from the World T20 final a couple of years earlier, where Brathwaite hit Ben Stokes for those 4 sixes and snatched victory away from you. What lessons had you learned as a leader, perhaps talking to your bowler in that clutch moment?
Yeah, probably stuff that people won't even notice. So I quite consciously, as a captain, in order to try and build trust and a good relationship with the bowler, so that when it's needed, if you need to change plans or set a completely different field, the bowler trusts you that your advice is good. I try and keep an open line of communication with him throughout the game, by going up to him, not at random times, but it might seem like random, even when he's bowling well, still checking in, making sure the plans are right, encourage him what he's doing right is doing a great job. But also when things don't go to plan, it allows you to go to the bowler and for him to be receptive. I think a lot of captains, certainly in my experience, only go to the bowler when the ball's been hit for 4 or 6, or he's bowled a handful of wides or a no ball, which in my eyes is completely wrong. And every time you go to the bowler, you don't necessarily have to speak, you can stand there. So lessons from 2016 to 2019, certainly one of them is the pace in which I run over to the bowler. In 2016, I thought it was slow. It turned out it wasn't. I actually ran to Ben. And And if I
Had
could
you
go back
looked back
then,
through all that? Had you seen it again?
well, at the time, so I always tell myself, take time. I make good decisions when I'm completely clear and can engage with the reality of what is actually happening. So that allows you time to look at the scoreboard, communicate with the bowler, make sure he's being receptive at the same time. When you rush that, I think you lose the ability to see if the bowler is receptive, if he's taking in what you're talking about, if he's talking sense at the same time. So one trick, I try and keep the ball in my hand for as long as I can. Because when I look back at 2016, spoke to Ben for what felt like 15, 20 seconds, and it was probably 3 or 4. And I turned and I ran, and Ben had the ball in his hand the whole time. So he just turned around and repeated the same thing. And I did not help him as much as I could have at the time. So I held the ball for as long as I could with Jofra. Again, it wasn't as long as I would have liked, but it was long enough to give him time to turn around and not take off. So he could turn around, compose himself, agree with what we were talking about. But the dialogue between me and Jofra, certainly before the Super over, I just asked him, what's your best ball? What are we trying to do? What are we trying to defend? He repeatedly said his Yorker was his best ball, which is the answer you wanted to hear. So again, repeating the same thing for 6 balls was going to be the plan, until he got hit for 6. And then we were in a position then where New Zealand, I suppose, were favourites to win the game, and we had to do something different. So we did. Jofra tried to bowl a bouncer, but at the same time, he was listening to everything that I was saying. He was making complete sense. Apart from the first delivery where he bowled a wide and then wanted to refer it to try and get the wide overturned. Apart from that, that's actually a good example of where his headspace was at. There are 2 balls. There's the first one where it was a tight call, but it was a wide, and we need to draw a line on there, move on. He went back, composed himself, bowled a really good follow-up ball. And then the next one is where he went to bowl a bouncer to Jimmy Neesham, and the ball chips to short extra cover. He gathers the ball and could have easily tried to throw the stumps down and be this big hero. But the composure that he showed then, with all the experience that he's played in domestic tournaments around the world, was huge. Because if he'd have missed the stumps, Guptill comes back, they only need 1 off 1. The game is completely dead and buried. So sort of to see such a young guy, 23, 24 years old, producing in big moments of the game is unbelievably promising for the future. Because he's playing in his first year in international cricket, and he's taking everything in his stride and learning at the same time. I think we've seen that in abundance throughout the Ashes. I think the level of expectation that he created during the World Cup, obviously, I think, a little bit detrimental to his own performance. But I think that's going to be the nature of his career, because he has such high potential. Everybody has shifted the bar and level of performance.
We've been going for an hour. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Final question. I can see it now, the image of you holding the World Cup up. Can you, like that, take yourself back into the moment? Can you still kind of feel it as if it was yesterday? And was that your greatest moment in the sport?
By far and away the greatest moment in my sporting career, and probably up until 3 months ago, my life. And lifting the trophy was just such a release of emotions. Every time I speak about it, I get goosebumps. It's the feeling inside where my heart's normally at a reasonable beat. It's anywhere between 70 and 85 is quite healthy. But it takes you back to that feeling, and guys behind you just shouting, and a full packed Lords. It's just the most incredible feeling.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Atherton.